In business today, three things to know. First, Apple slices. The long-awaited 7-to-1 split for Apple stock debuted Monday. What does it mean for shareholders and for the world's most valuable company? Then, asleep at the wheel. Prosecutors in the Tracy Morgan accident say the truck driver hadn't slept in 24 hours. Now there's a new focus on oversight for truckers. And in the corner office, the man who says the poor will save capitalism. Arisexchange starts now. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Schmertz. If you own shares of Apple, you now own 7 times as many. The company officially split its stock 7-to-1 today. Apple is worth just the same, just the stock price is less expensive, making it more appealing to retail investors. Let's take a look at how Apple closed out the day. It closed at $93.70, its new share price. That's up $1.48. In a moment, we'll talk more about the practical impact for investors on the Apple split. As for the rest of the markets, though, no stopping the record. The Dow Jones Industrial Average climbed $17.60 to a record 16,941. The S&P 500 at a record at 1951.26, and the Nasdaq up 1484 to 4336. Taking a look at the top stocks we're watching today, shares of the nation's largest magazine publisher, Time, fell by almost 5% this afternoon on its first day of trading. This after it spun off from parent company Time Warner. Time trading under the symbol TIME, closing down 209 to 68.99. Tyson Foods beat out the competition for Hillshire Brands. The largest U.S. meat processor will pay $7.7 billion, or $63 a share, for Hillshire, the makers of Jimmy Dean sausage and Ballpark Franks. Tyson closing down 262 to 37.50. And shares of Family Dollar stores sizzled after billionaire investor Carl Icahn disclosed his 9.4% stake in the company. Family Dollar, which has now also adopted a shareholder rights plan known as a poison pill, closed up $8 to 68.62. And commodities, gold closing up $1.10 to 12.53, and oil up to 104.38. Joining us now to talk more about Apple's stock split is David Garrity. He's principal and technology analyst at GVA Research. David, welcome back to Arisexchange.
Thank you.
All right, the stock split is really just a numbers game. It doesn't really do anything to the valuation of the company, but why did Apple take this step now?
I think you have to look at a couple of things, which is A, first and foremost, it's important here that Apple understands very clearly that they're a consumer-oriented company. And from that standpoint, obviously, it's good from the standpoint of the stock split to bring the price down to a level where perhaps more the individual retail investor, who arguably is the lead consumer of Apple products, can actually afford to buy a round lot of shares.
Historically, do we then see companies that do these stock split perform better over time?
Over time, they will, not necessarily immediately. If you wanted to get a more immediate positive response, typically the stock split would be accompanied by a dividend increase or perhaps some type of announcement increasing an authorization for buyback.
And Apple has already done that, right?
Very much so.
Dividends and a buyback of its shares.
Yes, more than once this year.
It was trading at $700 or so, or was getting close to that $700 line. Steve Jobs wasn't for splitting the shares, was he?
Steve was a little bit indifferent with respect to the individual investor, and quite rightly so. I mean, Steve had come back, obviously seen the creation of the company once and then oversaw its turnaround when necessarily individual investors had fled in droves. But quite clearly now, Apple is a completely different company from the stock market perspective than it was when Jobs was the CEO.
Does this move in splitting the stock quiet some of those calling for an increased buyback, calling for more dividends, calling back for it to use its cash in any way, or does this not affect any of that?
That doesn't affect any of that. What it really does serves to do, though, is it broadens the investor audience potentially that could be coming in to buy Apple shares. Some people have speculated it might allow Apple to be included in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, but that on its own won't necessarily drive share prices higher. Not much money is indexed to the Dow.
So for investors, they got a share split. For Apple consumers, what are they getting going forward, especially after the developers conference, and what are we going to see from Apple product line?
I mean, the major thing to look for from an Apple consumer standpoint is look for the new model of the iPhone 6, expected out in the September 2014 timeframe. Obviously, this is the major product change that the company has every year, and certainly many expectations around stock price performance hinge on how well they do there. there. We did have the Worldwide Developers Conference last week, but that was really more of an event aimed at the independent software vendors or developers who support Apple in terms of developing apps for the iPhone. But and away from that, the other thing we need to look at is obviously Beats Electronics. People may have been critical of the acquisition for about $3 billion, but it does serve to revitalize the music franchise, which really underpinned Apple's rise with the iPod going back 10 years ago.
Looking at the developers conference, some of the analysts said this is now Apple really starting to take on Android, that they see Android as the threat. Do you see any of that coming out of this conference, and that Apple's going to be more aggressive in the Android market?
Well, it's good to see that Apple, Apple only has about less than a 20% share in terms of smartphone operating system devices out there. Even though iOS is a very good system, obviously Android has gotten the bulk of the share that's out there. So it's nice to see that Apple, yes, has responded. How long it takes for new products to come into the pipeline to basically offset Android, we're going to have to probably see a lower priced device from Apple to allow them to go into the mass market that Android has really taken.
If you're evaluating CEO Tim Cook from both an investor standpoint and from the consumer standpoint, how is he doing right now?
Cook is starting to interact better with the major constituencies that are out there in terms of both the shareholders and I think importantly to try to push forward a bit more change with respect to the consumers. And so from that standpoint, how the company does with the somewhat expanding portfolio with Beats Electronics now part of that will be very interesting to see.
Okay. David Garrity, Principal and Technology Analyst at GVA Research. Thank you so much. Good analysis. Well, you've seen the news, certainly, that the rich are getting richer. A new study reports that the world added 2.6 millionaires in 2013. That's up 19%. What's wrong with that? More people, more richer, the better. Why are the rich getting richer? And what about the rest of us? Milton Ezrati, a senior economist with Lord Abbett, is joining us right now. Milton, welcome back to Arisexchange.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so what, basically, what is the basic here that is driving sort of the wealth creation at the top end of the spectrum?
Well, I think that the gains that we've seen in wealth, at least according to the Federal Reserve and to any common sense, have occurred in stocks and to some extent in real estate values. The wealthy own the most stocks, and they also own the biggest houses. So the dollar return has been the greatest at the top end of the income scale.
And the real creation of wealth happens in assets, doesn't it? You're not going to get wealthy earning a paycheck.
Well, at the low end of the income scale, they just don't have the assets. And unfortunately, we have not seen the gains in wages and other forms of income that benefit them.
If you look at these assets, though, the criticism or the fact is that some have said we've created this asset bubble, that the stock prices are a bubble, that the real estate market is this asset bubble. And therefore, it is sort of what we're looking at with the top end of the wealthy, a little bit out of whack, meaning that the numbers are a little bit more tenuous?
Well, I don't think there's a bubble yet. I think these numbers will reverse in time, and that's a longer-term, more fundamental story. But I actually think there's more room for both groups, both the real estate and the stock prices, to continue rising. When you compare them to where things were in 06, 07, before the crash, there's a lot of room to rise, and the fundamentals in the economy, certainly corporate earnings, support it. Housing remains relatively affordable by historic standards. That suggests we could see more real estate gains as well.
And if housing is more affordable, isn't that a major driver of getting the middle class into the upper middle class, but they have yet to participate?
Well, I think that the problem for the lower reaches of the income distribution is they can't get credit. The housing is there is certainly less than last year, but there is certainly a tremendous inducement to buy. Compared with where things were in 06, for example, but they can't get the credit, so they are effectively shut out of this market.
And is that to some extent because the banks have been regulated to the point where they can't give the credit?
Well, there's the regulation, and there's also their rather difficult memories of what happened in 08 and 09. They don't want to make the same mistake twice, and now they're being overcautious.
Let's talk about the idea of income inequality. It is widening. There's obviously the book Capital in the 21st Century by Professor Tom Piketty, who is making the case that the middle class are entirely getting squeezed out. What are you seeing is going on here, and do you agree with him?
Well, I wouldn't say Piketty. I reject his thesis. He argues that what we're seeing here is endemic to capitalism, and I doubt that's the case. This recent move here, of course, is a cyclical move back from great lows, and it has benefited the wealthy, particularly because of the credit situation. But the other thing is he has looked at numbers that are, I think, even though it's a long horizon, they're particular to a period when we've had a tremendous growth in the workforce. First, the tremendous birth rates in the West years and years, centuries ago, because he starts with the French Revolution. And then in more recent years, we had the entry of China and India and the ex-Soviet countries into the global system. And they have increased the workforce. And naturally, that has held back wages, whereas it has been a benefit to capital. So I think that's beginning to reverse. We've assumed all these workers, and we have actually slowed the birth rate in the major developed countries over the years. We're going to have a shortage of workers. This may reverse quite naturally.
That's interesting. So you're saying because basically we're just at a historic demographic change right now.
I think we are at a historic demographic, and actually it would have started earlier if we hadn't had the collapse of the Soviet Union and the entree of these countries into the world system. But that's largely run its course. I think we're going to see a big reverse over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Historically, when we come out of a recession, do the wealthiest need to get wealthier and then pull everyone along with them? Is this a trend that we typically see?
It's been worse in this, I think, for two reasons. One is because the banks are so gun-shy because of their experience, because of the regulation. And the other is that we have had such a poor growth in employment. The lower reaches, whether it's the lower middle class or classes below them, their main gains do not come from asset increases. They come from wages. And we have seen in the United States maybe half the rate of employment we have in past cyclical recoveries.
And we haven't started to see any sort of wage pressure yet.
You bet.
Okay, Milton Ezrati, senior economist and market strategist with Lord Abbett. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And coming up, are regulators the ones asleep at the wheel when it comes to the trucking industry? You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own news network, first thing I think I'd want high-quality reporters, very educated, intelligent people.
Hello, I'm Francesca Maxime.
I'm Julian Phillips.
I'm Wendy Gillette.
I'm Sophia Songhai.
I'm Gary Anthony Ramsey. Thank you for joining us here in New York City.
I would like to see more people of color represented in high positions in media.
We've got world-class journalists, veteran journalists who have been in this industry for decades, not just in front of the camera, but behind the scenes as well.
People need to understand the problems that are going on in the community are much closer than we actually think they are.
Kayla Phillips is one of the shoppers who is suing Barney's, and she is here with her attorney. What is it that you want from them?
Not to judge every African-American person that comes in your store.
Welcome back to Arisexchange. After this weekend's truck crash that left actor-comedian Tracy Morgan and two others critically injured, including one man dead, federal investigators are taking a closer look at truck safety. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is Henry Jasny. He's vice president at Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety to talk about what can be done to prevent these tragedies and whether we need more regulations. Henry, thank you very much for joining us today. Let me start by asking, we've talked about this before, what kind of regulations are there for truck drivers specifically working, I believe, for one company, in this case, Walmart?
Well, there are federal regulations that cover all drivers who have to keep records of duty, that is logbooks, and it's to require them, allowing them to drive, but requiring them to take certain times off each day within a 24-hour period and at the end of each week in order to get rest. But those regulations are not stringent enough to make sure that there are no fatigued drivers on the road.
Well, in this case, if he did not get sleep for 24 hours and was driving past that, who's ultimately responsible, him or is Walmart going to face some responsibility here?
Well, I don't know if the Walmart faces liability because it's a question of whether he had a history of doing this and they knew about it and how they hired him. That information's not known. But we do know that within the industry, it's endemic that nighttime drivers suffer from fatigue. About 1 in every 7 fatal crashes involves a tired driver.
What do you say to Americans who are on the road driving next to these large trucks, especially late at night?
Don't drive next to those trucks, especially late at night.
Okay, very simply. What then should the government do now? I understand there had been some reports that Congress had pushed back on improving these regulations.
Well, there was a provision in the Senate appropriations bill that would take away the 2 safety breaks, the 2 safety reforms that were trying to give drivers a little more rest as they work through their month of tours of duty. And there's a provision that would take those away and allow drivers to continually drive without getting a full weekend's rest at any time. We've opposed that. We think that that's a rollback on safety.
Yeah, why are there such stringent requirements, let's say, for pilots and commercial aviators, and yet when you're talking about the roads where accidents can occur and do occur far more frequently, we have a much more lax attitude?
Unfortunately, the public and the media, unless there's a crash involving a celebrity, don't pay much attention to the crashes with trucks that occur every day, day in and day out, that take 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 lives, but they do pay attention when an airliner goes down.
What is the industry's reaction? Do you think that the industry is going to maybe do some more voluntary regulations here and self-regulate?
No, I think the industry's push is to get more and more and more to be greedier, greedier, greedier. They want to do away with all controls on hours of service. They want to get bigger trucks and heavier trucks on the road. We just think that it's a real problem that already affects safety. And if you just allow these rules to go by the wayside, you're going to get even more crashes out on the roadways.
Well, I should say that Walmart has stepped up at least and said that if the driver is responsible, they are going to assume responsibility here. So they may be trying to get to the forefront of this because obviously, besides the tragedy, this is a public relations disaster for them. So, you know, what kind of pressure are the drivers under? Because we're quick to blame this guy, but the drivers have to be under a significant amount of pressure from their employers.
It's a phenomenal amount of pressure. It's a hard job to begin with. They work up to 70 or 80 hours a week, which is twice what the average American works. A lot of these drivers who are in this situation get paid only by the mile. So if they're not driving, they're not getting paid. They're exempt from the Fair Labor Standards Act, so they don't get overtime when they work over 40 hours. And so there's a big economic crunch on them. And that's why they're struggling to pay their bills and to keep their trucks moving. The problem is the industry shouldn't be allowed to take advantage of that. Years ago, a labor economist called this sweatshops on wheels, and that's what they still are today.
Okay, Henry Jasny with the Advocates for Highway and Auto Safety. Thank you for your thoughts.
You're welcome.
Time now for our business ticker, stories making news around the world. President Obama pledged increased support for middle-class families struggling with student debt. The president signed a memorandum officially supporting a Senate bill that's supposed to address the issue. Here's a little of what he had to say.
So you got a pretty straightforward bill here. And this week, Congress will vote on that bill. And I want Americans to pay attention to see where their lawmakers' priorities lie here. Lower tax bills for millionaires or lower student loan bills for the middle class.
The president specified the bill would offer relief through pay-as-you-earn programs, provided more information to potential borrowers, and more protections from predatory lending. Cybercrime is costing the global economy $445 billion each year. A new report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is sponsored by the software company McAfee, found the damage to business from theft of intellectual property exceeded the loss to individuals from hacking. The world's biggest economies, such as the U.S., China, Japan, and Germany, took the brunt of the losses, reaching $200 billion a year. Amazon launching its online payment service today in an effort to compete with PayPal. The service will give their more than 240 million active users the option to pay for various goods and subscriptions through their Amazon account, using payment information that's already on file. Acting as a middleman for third-party sellers, Amazon will charge a fee on each transaction. And Hershey is suing a Colorado company claiming it makes pot-infused candy that's too closely resembling its iconic products. The trademark infringement lawsuit filed against Tinkerbell Marijuana alleges the edible marijuana products are packaged in colors matching 4 of their famous treats, which it says will confuse consumers, including children. Take a look and judge for yourself. Here's Ganja Joy next to Almond Joy Bar, Hass Heath compared to Heath Bar, then Hashies in a very similar orange wrapper as Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. That might confuse E.T. And here we have Dabby Patty next to York Peppermint Patty. Ahead, how about a drink with your Uzi and a sore loser finds himself our favorite person of the day. You're watching Arisexchange.
If I was building my own network, it would be for the people, by the people. It would be very diverse. It would be with every culture you can think of.
If I was to start my own news network, it would reflect positive and negative within the continents and the countries around the world.
I think that I would be more looking towards young people.
If I were to build my own news network, it would look like New York City. Old, young, fresh, hip, classic.
If I was to build my own news network, I would just have people from all over who are very connected and diverse.
If I was to build my own news network, my own world network, I would love a correspondent in every country, every location, every city. I mean, it's kind of unrealistic, but how cool would it be to get local stories from the impoverished country, the impoverished city that we don't know about?
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
Pull up to the bar because we have 2 liquid lunches for you today. First up, they call it a Guntry Club. In Oklahoma City, a new gun range is opening up that is also a bar. The Wilshire Gun Club features 24 firing lanes, including archery, and a lounge where you can order drinks. Customers can bring their own guns or rent guns, including machine guns. It will be the first Guntry Club in Oklahoma, and there are only a handful nationwide. The co-owner says, quote, guns are the new golf. I don't know. I've seen some golfers hack away and then yell and scream. I'm not sure I want them packing heat. Now, if this employee at a Family Dollar store was armed with anything other than a bottle of Febreze, things may have been much worse. Gavin Edinger was a manager at the store in Saginaw, Michigan, when he confronted a few alleged shoplifters. After throwing them out of the store, he then got into a confrontation with them in the parking lot, and this happened.
You should be embarrassed, and you should be sorry. And how dare you say something to me about cussing, and you are teaching them children how to speak to your mother. Get yourself together.
Don't hit my car again.
Call them, send them up here. Call them right now.
Yeah, he sort of lost it. Edinger sprayed them with a bottle of Febreze. At least they smell nice now. After the video got out, Family Dollar fired him. But he says the mother of one of the girls actually called the store to apologize. And that takes us to our favorite person of the day. He was a close runner-up when we pick one person who grabbed our attention and not for the right reasons. Today, it is the co-owner of California Chrome who is being called a sore loser, and he is now apologizing for it. Immediately after Chrome came in 4th in the Belmont Stakes, thereby losing the chance to win the Triple Crown, co-owner Steve Coburn went on an angry rant and blasted the winning horse, Tonalist, calling the owners cowards for not racing Tonalist in the previous Kentucky Derby and Preakness, and saying Chrome had a target on his back. Here is what he had to say.
This is a coward's way out. So you think they came right after your horse and that was the plan, just like they have other potential Triple Crown?
Exactly. Our horse had a target on his back. Everybody else lays out one, or they won't run in the Kentucky Derby or the Preakness. They'll wait until the Belmont. You know what? If you've got a horse, run him in all 3.
Good for him. You know what? I think he has a good point there. He's apologizing for his rant, but he does have a point about horses racing in all 3 races. And so despite walking back his comments, we'll make Steve Coburn our favorite person of the day. Coming up, our next guest says it will be the poor who will save capitalism. We'll find out why. You're watching Arisexchange.
I think news does make people put things in black and white terms just so that they have a dividing line between what their viewers like and dislike.
When they see a person of color, they either think that they're not going to do anything, they're either on drugs or they got pregnant at an early age, and I just want to say that that's not true.
It tends to reflect more the interests of the upper income people and the upper income interests.
Arise News, every culture, every angle.
In tonight's Corner Office, eradicating poverty in America through strategies developed by investment banking. Our next guest, John Hope Bryant, has used more than $2 billion of private capital to build low-income homes, small businesses, and community development. And he says it will be the poor who will save capitalism. In fact, he has a book, How the Poor Can Save Capitalism. Joining us now is John Hope Bryant. Welcome to Arisexchange.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And the book's a bestseller this week.
Well, it's a terrific, congratulations. It's a terrific title. Tell us in a few seconds how the poor can save capitalism, why you believe that's going to happen.
They already are. You and me, when we were coming up, we had a cell phone, but it was a brick. It was a Motorola brick. It was 10 pounds going to your show, $3,000.
I remember.
Now, Africa will probably be a wireless continent. I mean, it'll probably be the first continent that jumps right over landline phones, and we'll have cell phones. In fact, about 700 million people today have cell phones.
And people at the lower end of the income spectrum are the ones with the cell phones.
You're right. Before they have running water, they've got a cell phone. And they're driving the growth of all the cell phone companies. Restaurants were toys for the rich. Cars were originally toys for the rich. Almost every category, it was the commoditization of those products.
Sure.
To the least of these God's children that allowed the markets to grow and shareholders to prosper.
And in the information technology where we are, as you said, commoditizing, getting this in the hands of people who did not have the power before, is going to make them powerful.
Well, no, that's part of the power. So we already have the consumer power, but we never got the memo. So in 1865, President Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. Before that, we know that. But what we don't know is he signed a piece of legislation called the Freedmen's Bureau Act that created the Freedmen's Bank. March 3rd, 1865. The Freedmen's Bank's mission was to teach freed slaves about money. So he thought the most important thing he could do
is financial literacy.
After fiscal freedom was to teach about the free enterprise system. He was killed 2 weeks later. The bank fell into disrepair. Literally, 100 years passes by. You know, you have Dr. King and my mentor Andrew Young, 1965. 68, King gets killed pursuing the Poor People's Campaign. Once again, 2 weeks later, he's killed.
To that point, then, are we doing a good enough job in financial literacy to the people who could benefit the most from it? Because we're talking
doing a horrendous job.
We're talking about income inequality here, but part of that is that the tools aren't being given to the people on the lower end of the income.
We're doing a horrible job. It's like having the bridges leading into Manhattan with people driving cars with no driver's license. We're driving the largest economy in the world, and we're not teaching anybody the language of money. And this is not a poor people's issue. Yep. If you're living in Manhattan and you're making less than $70,000 a year, you're struggling to make ends meet.
No kidding, yeah.
You're living in D.C., making less than $50,000 a year, you're struggling to make ends meet. So you're talking about half the country makes $50,000 a year or less with too much month at the end of their money. They can't go buy a refrigerator every 7 years like GE needs them to. They can't go buy a car every 3 to 5 years or lease it like the automobile manufacturers need them to. So we shouldn't be talking about a minimum wage that's government sponsored. We should be talking about a living wage that's free enterprise encouraged, because the more money you have, the more money you spend.
I was going to ask you that. How much is the government too involved here in sort of that safety net, which has to exist? But the result is, are we not giving anybody the information and tools to get out of there?
It's an overcorrection. Now, it's an understandable overcorrection because the markets need capitalism needs bumpers. So we figured out from 2005, being conservative, really 2003 to 2009, capitalism needs bumpers. But you can overcorrect, and that's what's happened. Unless you have an 800 credit score now and a 30% down payment, you aren't getting a loan to buy a home. And we need people to buy homes. I don't care what anybody says.
Well, it's too much regulation. We talked about it earlier. Too much regulation on the banks.
Yes.
And is there too much of a push, like you said, for the minimum wage, which is important, or is too much
of a push? It's a wrong argument. It's a wrong argument. It shouldn't be an entitlement argument based out of charity. It should be an empowerment argument based on emerging market opportunities. What I'm saying is we're tapping down on the one engine that could drive economic growth.
Okay, so how do we get that empowerment there? What are the key tools to get us there?
Well, I list out 20 20, this is not a book of complaints. This is a book of solutions. There's 20 public policy solutions at the end of the book. One of them is very simple. I'm going to drive credit scores. So in a so-called poor neighborhood, but by the way, military, outside of military outlets, you have these check cashers, also next to payday loan lenders, next to rent-own stores, next to title lenders, next to liquor stores. That's not racism. That's target marketing. They're targeting a 500 credit score customer.
Payday loans.
All
that
of them.
mark.
All of
All
them.
that mark.
Basically, predatory financial providers. We are moving credit scores 120 points at Operation Hope. Nothing changes your life more than God or love than moving your credit score 120 points. So when you do that neighborhood by neighborhood, guess what? You're creating sustainable customers for banks, for credit unions, for financial service providers, folks who would actually pay their bills. So that's just one strategy. But all these big businesses that are hopefully advertising on a rise were once small ones. People forget that J.P. Morgan Chase was a guy named J.P.
And Goldman Sachs was Goldman on the corner.
Et cetera. UPS, a little guy with $100 in a bike.
God-loving credit scores. Terrific. Come back soon. John Hope Bryant, thank you so much. I know it went by quickly. Appreciate it. Tomorrow on Arisexchange, supporting small farmers in sub-Saharan Africa and why the global economy is dependent upon their survival. Let's take a look at the markets real quick. A record day on Wall Street. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for watching Arisexchange. That was terrific. I know Bug with that. In business today, 3 things to know. First, Apple slices the long-awaited 7